Research shows that women do 5 times as much unpaid care work as men. So how can women achieve financial economic empowerment? This week we speak to Elizabeth Obanda, the UN Women Team Lead for Women's Economic Empowerment, on how structures can be put in place to ensure that women play their role in financial empowerment. This is She Means Business. I am your host, Claire Munde. You sit at the intersection of some of the most important conversations when it comes to women's economic empowerment, and your background is in food science. So before we get the conversation going on women's economic empowerment, I'd like us to understand your own background. How did you end up as the lead for economic empowerment at UN Women, and what has your background and journey been to where you are today?
It is true that I have a degree in food science and specialization in post-harvest technology. A diploma, postgraduate diploma in project planning and management, and a master's degree in gender and international development. And started in a very interesting way when I was young, newly married, a mother. The tea industry was, the tea packing was liberalized. Initially, it just used to be ketepa, and nothing else. And so when the tea packing was liberalized, I decided to get into that space because I had studied beverage technology as part of food science. So I started there and grew, and was selling to wholesalers, and began to have, can I say stores in Luanda, in Butere, and in Kericho. But along the line, as the business grew, I also began to incur extensive losses because you know how we are, we employ our own to manage our stores, and so when you supply the tea, you go back, you find the tea has been sold, but there's no money. And I think what broke the camel's back was that the two major buyers, wholesalers, that I was selling to of Asian extraction just upped and went to India. With all my money, and so I decided I'd had enough. I was not going to go back into the business of selling tea because I had taken a loan to do that business, and so I stopped that business and got into research. In the earlier years, one of the first supermarkets to come into Kenya was Uchumi, and Uchumi was interested in selling fruits and vegetables, and they needed to be able to understand the traceability of the fruits and vegetables. Where are the fruits coming from? Where are the vegetables coming from? And so we traveled all over the country, literally every part of Kenya, to try and understand where are the tomatoes coming from, who is producing the tomatoes, what are the challenges that they have, where are they getting seeds from, what about fertilizers, what about knowledge, extension services, So at the end of that study, I felt that I understood smallholder farming systems, completely. I understood what the issues were, including infrastructure, transportation, literally everything that you can think about, post-harvest, and the losses. And that touched me, and I wanted to be part of the solution, And, women are found in the smallholder farming systems. About 60 to 70% of the smallholder farmers are women. And because of that, then I applied for a position as a programs manager in charge of livelihoods in an organization known as African Now in Kisumu. And I signed up, and they wanted somebody who had a master's degree in agriculture and somebody who had experience in NGO world. I had neither. I had a degree in food science, post-harvest management. I had absolutely no experience in NGO world, apart from the experience I had in business. But I turned up, and after the interviews, I was one of two, last ones. And so when the CEO interviewed me, a wonderful gentleman whose name I shouldn't mention. But when he interviewed me, he said, Elizabeth, you don't have any experience in NGO world, and you don't have a master's in agriculture. This gentleman who who is a finalist like you, has a master's degree in agriculture, doing his PhD, and he has previous experience in Juhat. So why should I pick you? And I said, they don't come better than Elizabeth. Yeah, I am good at what I do. I am a quick learner. I am dedicated, and I can tell you for sure that I will run your programs and make you proud. So that's how I got the job. So my first job in the NGO world was as a programs manager. The interesting thing is that 1 year down the line, I was promoted to be the regional manager. So fast tracking that, moving forward, 2.5 years down the line, I then moved to Farm Africa as the planning and resource mobilization person. All their resource mobilization was being done in the UK, but they decided that they wanted to have local, resources also. As part of their strategy. So I was the first occupant of that office in Farm Africa in the Nairobi office. But I turned the strategy on its head because according to me, it was very difficult to use events to collect resources here, adequate resources to be able to drive programming. And so I began to engage with donors, to write proposals, and within 2.5 years, I did very well. And I was actually then promoted to be the regional manager in charge of planning and fundraising, covering Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Southern Sudan. So I did that for 2.5 years, and it was excellent work. I enjoyed doing it. And then I moved on to Aga Khan Foundation. And Aga Khan Foundation was a very big organization with very many programs. And they were looking for head of rural development, or what we can call rural economic development. So from the Aga Khan Foundation then, I was moving to USAID as head of resilience, Horn of Africa. And then Trump happened, the first time that Trump happened. So suddenly I didn't have work because I had been shown where to sit, what my contract was going to be, where to park, and then Trump happened. And then everything was dropped. The first time that Trump ascended into power. And so I started consulting. So I consulted for FAO, I consulted for Oxfam, I consulted for a few organizations. And somehow UN Women contracted me as an advisor to the Agriculture Finance Corporation as a gender advisor in agri-finance. And the issue was that AFC had been in operation for over 60 years, and the loan portfolio to women was less than 10%. So the question was, why is that the case? So I was asked to go there, try and find out what the issues were. Of course, the biggest problem and the biggest obstacle was collateral. If you're asking women to provide land title or car title, where are they going to get that? And so it was an interesting time. And from that, then I went back to UN Women substantively as the team lead for women's economic empowerment. So it's a long journey, but an interesting journey. But one thing led to another until where I am now.
When people start businesses, you always want it to succeed, but that's not always the case. There are many factors that happen. So what are those things that you would say, tell a woman there who is probably in business and is looking at their financials and thinking, oh my goodness, this doesn't seem to be working, but I started this thing and this thing has got to work. When is it that you need to say, you know what, I have had a good run or not, and it's time to fold this up and probably go back to employment? Because that is a scary thing for some women sometimes. You think, I have been trying this business, oh my goodness, there's shame sometimes that, you know what, I tried, I failed, I have to go back to employment. What would you say to that woman? When do you know this thing has to just close down? When do you know probably I need to get a job and maybe I'll try something different at a different time?
I had been at this business for 5 years. I had put in my very best. I had innovated on the packaging initially when I started, and I wanted to be different, because in Kenya people associated tea. Now you can see gold, other packages that are not green and yellow, but in the olden days tea was green and yellow. So I decided I didn't want to be like everybody else, because people were imitating Ketepa and calling themselves Kiti, Kotopa, all sorts of things, and they were, so that people could be confused. But I wanted to be different. So I had the color of tea, the beautiful color of tea. I had a logo that was a kettle that is smiling. You know, yeah, I really wanted to be different. Then I realized, people don't understand what you're saying. People know tea to be yellow and green. So I innovated, and I had a brand that was called Kenya Chai, and it was yellow and tea. But I still refuse to call myself Kitipa or Kotopa, whatever it is. So I innovated, and I found that went very well. The wholesalers were able to buy it. It was selling very well, and as I said, it grew. You know, I improved on the packaging. I looked around for people who could, because I couldn't afford the machinery. So really, I was just using the olden days. The way tea was packed was different from the way tea is packed now. So we refined the way that tea was packed. It was so professionally done. We refined the, so everything was refined. And as I said, we were growing. But we started noting, as I said, as you grow and you supply tea and you go back and you find there's no money and you start taking loans, you start making losses because you are putting in money but you're not getting anything. So I held on for a year, for 2 years, and I got to a point where it was just too much. And I think that we must be able to accept that if I have been running for 5 years, for goodness sake, and I am not making money and I don't see a future in this, I must be able to say, look, call myself to a meeting and say, look, enough is enough. Let me try something else. So I said, I'm not going to take another loan. Enough is enough. I think it's coming to that realization. And sometimes when you are not brave to say enough is enough, let me try something else, you never really get to know what you're good at.
You have been able to go to a lot of organizations in the NGO world. After you got into research, then you went from here, there, and everywhere. There are people, not just women, men and women, who are always thinking about, there's the NGO world, especially before Trump. It's an appealing place to be, but many people don't know how to get their foot in the door. So for that woman or even man listening out there and they're interested in getting into the developmental space and the NGO world, what are some of the tips of how you can get into that space? Because as you said, many times they ask, you don't have experience in the NGO world, and not everyone is as lucky to get the job like you. So you don't have experience. So how will I get the experience? How do I get my foot in the door in this space and form a career out of it?
So you must have content. You must have content. So that you're not thinking about it when people ask you questions. You're not lying, because when you do, people catch you flat-footed. So I understood the content completely, and I was able to speak with confidence about it. So yes, I might not have worked with the NGO world, but did I have content? I heard. So for me, that is what is important, that people who want to get into the NGO world, do you understand that thematic area that you want to be involved in? If you're talking about farming, what do you know about farming? Have you researched? Have you understood what the issues are? Do you have possible solutions within you? What is your value add? Why are you getting there? Because sometimes you ask people, what is your motivation for this job? Oh, I saw the job and I applied for it. No. For me, I had motivation. I had been there. I had seen the pain. You produce tomatoes and they rot, because the road infrastructure is poor, because the market is not even, you don't know where you're going to sell it, because the packaging is poor. You pile crates on one another and they destroy the tomatoes. I understood what the issues were, and I wanted to be part of the solution. So do you know what you want? Are you going to add value? Do you know what solutions you'll bring on board?
So now let's talk a little bit about women's economic empowerment. And you said that issue of sometimes women are disadvantaged because they may not have access to those title deeds, the logbooks, and so many other things. Now, sometimes when we talk about women's economic empowerment, sometimes it's looked at from the perspective of it's an individual's responsibility. But from where you sit, I'd like us to talk about the policy implications, things like culture and so on and so forth, that play a part into ensuring that women can get that empowerment that they need. What are those policies that need to be put in place? What are the gaps?
When you're talking about individual, we are talking about agency. And yes, it is true that the agency is important. Your ability to show up, your ability to speak is also important. Your ability to be a leader, okay? Some of it is inherent, but some of it can be grown, can be nurtured. Okay, and that's why most of the empowerment programs are nurturing women to be able to speak up, to say, like Elizabeth said, that they don't come better than Elizabeth. Yeah. So that element is important. your ability to say no or yes, or to show up, or to do the urgency. That is important. But the environment must be enabling. What kind of environment do we live in? We live in an environment that is patriarchal. The way that our communities are structured are such that the men have, as I said, certain privileges, the women tend to be burdened, making it very difficult for them sometimes to play in the economic space. And that is what women's economic empowerment is trying to do. Not just to make sure that women have access to economic opportunities, but also to try and address some of these things, some of these barriers that hold women back. So the government of Kenya has done well in the sense that we have a committed Ministry of Gender, Department of State Department for Gender, committed, whose responsibility is to mainstream gender in every way. Okay, so that is a big plus, with a whole CS, with a whole PS, with directors, looking at gender issues and climate change. So as the climate is changing, what is it that we need to do? Where's the space of women who are affected, around care, around agriculture. So I think the government has done well, and their policies. Right now we have just finalized, already there's a women's economic empowerment strategy in place. We have just finalized the national policy on women's economic empowerment, and it has gone through cabinet, it is in parliament right now, and that's a good thing, because it is making sure that women are visible, that women's economic empowerment, it is saying that the government of Kenya is committed to women's economic empowerment. I have been fortunate to lead the development of the national policy on care. Okay, in fact, Kenya is the first in the whole of Africa to develop a national policy on care.
I'd like us to also talk about the role that this country, Kenya, plays when it comes to really pushing for the women's economic empowerment, because Nairobi plays host to the biggest UN HQ in the global south. So from where you sit, where do you see Kenya and what role it should be playing when it comes to women's economic empowerment? As you said, Kenya is the first to have this unpaid care policy, other than Cape Verde. But what other things do you think Kenya should be doing, given its role and position that it has?
I think again, I want to say, not just because I'm a Kenyan, but I want to say that Kenya, in terms of policies, is advanced. I've also, as part of gender responsive, as part of women's economic empowerment, also the work around gender affirmative procurement is also domiciled within my unit. And so I've spoken at length around gender responsive procurement, especially AGPO, access to government procurement opportunities. Kenya is one of the few countries, again, that have that policy in place and that has set aside intentionally 30% of its procurement for women, youth, and persons with disabilities. So that's an excellent policy document as well. The issue is on its implementation. As it is now, the uptake of that 30% is only around 18.5% or so. Okay, around 11 point something percent is still not taken up by youth, women, and persons with disability, which means that we need to spend a lot of time creating awareness. So we as leaders in that space are also spending a lot of time speaking about it. I was on a panel again in Abuja speaking about gender responsive procurement, and everybody wants to hear, how come? What is it that you're doing in your country? And it was only Kenya that was ahead. Other people are thinking about what to do. So yes, we have policies around national care policy. We have the women's economic empowerment policy. We have policies around affirmative procurement, because globally women supply about just 1% of public procurement globally. So we want to try and move that space, because you and I know that since devolution, you will meet very many people in the countryside who are now very rich. They're millionaires. And most of those millionaires are men. Can we have women also in that space? Okay? Also benefiting, because we know that when women benefit, their children benefit, their households benefit. Even if something happens to the husband, they're able to pay school fees. They're able to, raise a family. So gender responsive procurement is also a space that we are playing in. We are helping the government with creating awareness, especially for rural areas, because not very many women in the rural areas know that there's this opportunity. We are helping the government procurement officers to comply, to train them so that they know that they're supposed to, prioritize these opportunities. We are trying to work around the space of the intersection between procurement and access to finance, so that there's a linkage between procurement and access to finance, because some of the women will tell you, I applied for AGPO, I got it, but I didn't have money to supply. Okay, so how do they get money to supply? So tying, and again, Kenya is ahead. We have ways of fund, we have NGAF, we have youth, we have all these funds. Okay, the issue is, are they picked?
Now we're about to shift gears in our conversation a bit, but before we do that, I have to ask this question and you'll tell us what you can. We recently have been having it all over the news about UN moving 3 agency headquarters to Kenya. I can see already smiling. So tell us what that means for women, and just tell us what you can comment about what it really means for Kenya as well.
Yeah, it's called pivoting. So they're pivoting to Kenya, which is a good thing. It's when you have your headquarters in New York, it's extremely expensive, or your headquarters in Switzerland, it's extremely expensive. So Kenya would be, comparatively cheaper. So it's pivoting to the field. I think not only for purposes of cost, but also being close to where the problem is. We are the ones who are asking for support. In whichever way, whether it is capacity or funding or policies, and so they want to try and grow Nairobi to the extent that it is like it can hold an assembly, a UN assembly, and I think for me that is excellent. One, it means that there'll be more jobs created, and so if there are more jobs created, and the women of Kenya now are going to school, there's almost equity in educational outcomes. Yeah. Gender equity in educational outcomes. So if our girls and boys are going to school, there'll be more jobs for them as the UN pivots here. Those of you who are business people and who own, housing, there'll be tenants, from the UN. So those are jobs. The construction industry, I believe, will grow, as you create more housing for them to stay in. And of course they have schools. Some of them have children going to schools. And the education sector, especially the lower schools, is entirely, mostly manned by women. So those are jobs for you when we have more schools being created, or we have more children going to school. So we have teachers, we'll have doctors, and they are female and male doctors. So according to me, it's a wonderful thing that the UN is coming here. It is recognition for Kenya, but Kenya has to do something about security. I think for me, that really is. Kenya has to do something about security. I work for the UN. Before you travel, you must ask for permission to travel. And they will check the security of that particular area before they say, yes, you can go. But if they say you cannot go, you cannot go. So if the UN is pivoting to Kenya and the security situation in Kenya is bad, then they might fold and go back. So I think we have to do something about the security.
So that has been a very good conversation. And as we wrap up the conversation, I'd like you to look into the camera and speak to those women who are listening right now and watching us right now, who are keen on their financial and economic empowerment. What one piece of advice would you give that woman on taking charge of her life and ensuring that she can become that financially empowered woman that she wants to be?
One of the best pieces of advice that I received from a lady when I was a young woman was that have your own money and control that money. Very, very important to have your own money and be able to control that money. And learn to manage your money properly. Learn to manage it for the sake of your family. Learn to manage it for yourself as well. Sometimes I think we go bonkers, if I can use that word. We spend our money excessively on things that are unnecessary, and we don't save. But have some saving. Have some saving. But be proud also to spend your money on your family. I know there are women who will not spend a shilling on their family. They'll say it's not their business. I'm telling you, it's your business. If you're saying that there should be gender equality and the empowerment of women, it means that you have room also to make money, and to make money for the good of your family and to support this man. So I think that is what I can say. Learn skills, make money, save, be proud to participate in the upkeep of your family, in the education of your children, in the housing. Why not? Be proud. And that pride comes from the fact that you have taken time, you have grown yourself, you have empowered yourself, and you're proud of your family. I think for me, that is what I can say. Have some money of your own.
I couldn't say it better. You've heard it from Elizabeth Obanda. Have your own money, honey, and know how to manage it well.
Yeah.
We've been speaking to Elizabeth Obanda, the team lead for UN Women Economic Empowerment for Women. This is She Means Business. I have been your host, Claire Munde. Until next time, have a good one.